What is up, guys? This is Chrono Joe, and today I've got some Uncharted 4 survival gameplay for you. And basically I just want to run through some Uncharted 4 survival gameplay, explain to you what I like about the mode, what I perhaps dislike, what could have been done better, and just give you my first impressions on my experience with the first kind of like 5 hours that I've played of the mode so far. Hopefully I'll also be able to provide some people with some tips. The most basic tip I would say is do not worry too much about getting the stars on your first run through. That's one thing that I was initially a bit bummed out about, was that it's actually quite difficult to get the stars when you don't know the routine of each wave, and also when you don't realise that you're not leveled up enough to deal enough damage, to take enough damage resistance, to beat the harder waves as easily as you would be able to later. It's just a lot easier to do a really chill run through of the game without worrying about the stars, and then come back later when you know the waves, you know the routine. You're more used to the combat, the flow of the each wave and what you need to do, and you also have all these passive benefits of being a higher level, so you can do more damage, you have more health. It's just far easier to kill things a lot faster when you're a higher level in the game, when you're more experienced. So that's my main advice in that regard. Don't stress about the stars early on, unless you're trying to race to be the first person there, and obviously people have already got there already. People have already beaten Crushing. Naughty Dog announced earlier, yesterday I think it was. It only took them just over 24 hours apparently, which makes sense because from my experience playing on normal and hard, because of the passive benefits you get from the health and damage, the increment from Crushing and hard isn't that significant. Like, it doesn't feel that steep to go from normal to hard. Not anywhere near as much as it does in the campaign, for instance, because you have all these like health benefits for being like your level. Like if you're getting to level 40, 50 or whatever, you have like an extra 50% health, 50% damage, for instance, and that seems to mitigate most of the damage increase and health increase that the enemies also get. So it doesn't necessarily feel like you're playing something that's drastically different from the difficulty below. And to a degree, that's a little bit disappointing. Like, I know a lot of people have been playing on hard, and because they've already got the stars on normal, they know the routine of most of the stages. There are some variants in terms of the rules, but most of it's pretty much the same, and they're able to get them on hard in their first try, and I've heard people doing the same thing on Crushing. Now, that's a little bit disappointing because it reduces the replayability, but at the same time I think this like 50 wave structure is a lot of fun. I can't remember the amount of times I played things like Gears of War Horde mode trying to get to wave 50 to finish the Horde, and actually finding that I actually just end up getting bored halfway through. Like, I get to wave 35 and I'm actually like, oh, we've been here for 2 hours, I'm bored of this, we've been on the same map, it's not that interesting, it seems like our strategy is quite sustainable. It looks like inevitably we're going to win, but I just don't want to sit it out long enough to get there. And this like staggered 50 wave system where you're moving between maps, and also you have checkpoints in between waves so you can return back to the point you were at any point in time, in my opinion is a lot more fun. It's a lot more engaging. I was able to play through the 50 waves on more than one occasion in a full run through and find myself not getting bored. And if I did find myself getting bored, you can just pick it back up right where you left off. So this is a really good way of presenting this kind of system. The gameplay itself mixes between survival, marked target, treasure hunter, siege, and boss waves. So the bosses are 4 unique bosses. They kind of slacked off with the last one because the last boss in the game, sorry to spoil anything in a little way, it's not actually a final boss at all, it's just a duplicate of the first boss. So it's not really spoiling anything at all, to be honest with you. It is kind of disappointing there's no sort of climax to the campaign where you fight an extra boss or something like that. You actually just fight 2 bosses in a row, which is, it's very intense, and I appreciate that kind of, the climax in that regard. It intensifies quite significantly during the final mission, which is cool, but it would have been really nice to see like an extremely difficult final boss that is unique to the final stage, in my opinion. The RPG systems and the loot system are a nice addition. So what happens is you basically drop weapons every time you kill a boss. There is some criticism could be labelled towards this, and that is basically, if you drop items when you defeat bosses, what's the point in doing the waves that don't feature bosses? Because waves 1 to 5, waves 11 to 15, waves 21 to 25, etc., those waves don't feature bosses. It's only the ones that end in a 0, basically. So waves 6 to 10, waves 16 to 20, etc., those all end in bosses, the ones before them don't. And considering you can replay particular segments of a wave, why would you deliberately replay any of the non-boss waves when they don't drop anything? So, I mean, apart from people who are playing all the way through, I don't know why people would deliberately select those non-boss waves. So it would have been nice to see some sort of reward given from those, either like treasure or something like that, in the same way as the bosses, really. To be honest, that would have been fine. I don't see why you can't get loot from them. They're generally not quite as difficult, but to get the stars on them is just as difficult. I don't know, the bosses themselves aren't that difficult in themselves. There are waves that... The game is challenging generally, like there are waves that are just as challenging as the bosses, I would say. And it doesn't necessarily make that much sense to have loot only tied to the bosses. Maybe they could have a chest spawn at the end of 5 waves, regardless if it's a boss or something like that. But I mean, they haven't done that, so at the moment it doesn't. If you're replaying waves and you're just looking for loot, it only makes sense to replay the bosses. And because there are 2 bosses in the final wave, it only really makes sense to replay those for the most part. Though I'm not sure how the looting system works. I'm not sure if there's any certain weapons you can get per boss, etc. So you might want to replay particular ones based on what weapons they can drop you. I noticed, and it could be coincidence, that the first boss seems to drop pistols consistently. Like every time I fought him, he's dropped a pistol, and some of the others have dropped different weapons. So it might be the case that it's unique to the bosses which weapon you can get. But yeah, that's about it. I haven't played it on my own. I hear that you can. I hear there's an AI partner. I've heard that the AI is reasonably competent, but the game doesn't seem to scale in any way. Like if you're playing with 2 people, it's not necessarily easier than if you were playing with 3. So the game doesn't scale for lower play numbers, so don't really expect to get your stars without a team of players. You can use the matchmaking, certainly. I was able to get stars with a team that I found in the public matchmaking, but it is easier if you bring in a team of friends and you kind of know what you're doing, and you say like, oh, we know where the siege point is, we can go stand there already. You can do things a lot faster if you coordinate in advance for each wave and communicate with each other on what you want to be doing. Because otherwise in public lobbies there's always going to be one guy that doesn't have a clue what he's doing. Like there's a siege point and the guy isn't going to go there or something like that. The guy's going to kill enemies that are outside of it, etc, etc. And as soon as you... Because it's time based, because earning the stars is based on your time to clear, if you're looking to get those stars, having a guy that kills enemies outside of the siege point is going to slow you down relatively significantly, and that is going to kill your time base. It's going to kill your entire run because one guy decides to like mess around. So it's... I'm not going to say it's like unplayable if you're playing with randoms, but it's definitely a night and day experience if you want to earn the stars. And I guess that's a little bit... It's a little bit disappointing that it's quite... You really have to deliberately go for them. You don't just have to play well, you have to play in a very particular and optimized way if you want to get the stars. And that's not going to happen naturally with a group of randoms. It might happen at higher difficulties if you like bump into the right group of randoms, but I wouldn't be willing to take that chance most of the time. So it's a bit of a shame that it's not just playing well that earns you the stars, not just like avoiding death and clearing the waves in like a minimum time. It's being as fast as possible, which means you really need to be optimizing your strategy per wave if you want the stars, and that's just not possible when one member of your team doesn't have a clue what they're doing, which often happens with public groups. Even on hard mode, I'd often find people who hadn't cleared normal mode and didn't seem to know what they were doing, like on the harder difficulty. They'd chosen to play the harder difficulty, yet they were quite remarkably poor in their understanding of what the objective was. And obviously, I mean, it's because it's early days, like not many people have played co-op yet, but also a lot of people have come back to Uncharted 4 to play co-op, and these people aren't familiar with the multiplayer. So a lot of the systems from multiplayer carry over here. Like a lot of people are familiar with the weapon handling and things like that, will be relatively familiar with how this plays as well. Like things like the not the M4, the AK, etc. The base handling of that weapon is, to my knowledge, the same as it is in multiplayer. So if you're in multiplayer all the time and you're playing that, you're going to have better accuracy than you are in if you didn't have that background. One thing that I really do have to commend is the quality of the boss fights in this game. Now, as someone who's played Destiny quite a bit in the past, it's remarkable how dull the strikes are in that game, and so many bosses are just large bullet sponges, which is what actually happens in a lot of these games. Even in games like Killing Floor, while they have like relatively diverse attack patterns, they often feel like bullet sponges. And Uncharted 4's bosses don't feel like that, in my opinion. There's only 4 of them, but for the most part, and I say for the most part because there is 1 or 2 which could be construed as a bullet sponge. The pirates in particular, like the one you're seeing on the screen now, or in a moment actually, are very well paced in the mechanics of the fight and things like that. They have periods of vulnerability and they have periods of like aggression, etc. And interplaying between those two states makes the fights really interesting and feel very dynamic. That's really quite different to how it feels like in a lot of games like The Division and Destiny, and it's remarkable that Naughty Dog have managed to put together such exciting boss fights within such a short space of time, to be honest. Like, this was quite a small addition to the game, and in honesty I didn't expect this much in terms of content. I didn't expect bosses, I didn't expect things like that, I didn't expect all the variety that comes with this, I didn't expect all the RPG systems, etc. So it's a real surprise, and it's a nice treat to have bosses that are actually fun to play, and not only play once but to replay. Like, I don't mind playing these again and trying to get faster times, etc., trying different strategies and things like that. They are a little bit rigid in terms of how you beat them. Like, there is a very particular way you want to beat them. Like, you want to make them vulnerable and then beat them that way, but you can use lots of different mysticals and weapons, etc., etc., to try and do that more efficiently. As advice for the two pirates, I would say if you strafe behind them and headshot them with a fully automatic assault rifle, you can get like 500 damage per bullet on that thing. So that does an incredible amount of damage, and I imagine that's the very fastest way you can kill them as well. If you can nail those headshots, and you need to get behind them to do that, then that's probably the best way to get them down. The reason you need to get behind them is because when they go into the vulnerable state, they kind of like collapse over backwards and their like head hangs behind them. It's very difficult to headshot them from the front at that point, but if you strafe behind them during that, then you can definitely get off a lot of damage, like a crazy amount of damage if you can get your whole team doing that. You could probably down the bosses in probably 2 rotations of the vulnerable state, at least within the normal difficulty. But either way, my impressions so far have been very positive. I'm a little bit disappointed that you can't do just kind of like a simple survival as well as this. And I would say the treasure hunt mode is like, it only comes up like 4 times in the entire like 50 wave survival. The treasure hunt mode is not especially fun. It's a mode that doesn't involve shooting anything really. Like, you're suboptimal if you're shooting anything, so it's just about running around and climbing things and things like that. And the movement systems aren't that exciting that I want to just run around for like 2-3 minutes on end. So it's not that interesting. Getting shot by enemies while you're doing it isn't that interesting, but at the same time it's just the most efficient way to do it. It's just ignore the enemies because they just slow you down, they slow your time down, and it means you don't get stars. So I would prefer the plunder capture mode from Uncharted 3 was in it. I think it might have been in Uncharted 2 as well, where you can just capture an idol and take it to a particular point, etc., etc. Because that involves combat, and that involves a bit of team coordination with a single idol, like interplay between teammates with the idol, and other teammates can focus on combat, etc. So it's got a bit more interesting dynamic to it. But either way, overall, a tremendous amount of fun. If you do own Uncharted 4, even if you don't like the multiplayer, I would recommend checking this out. You can play it on your own. You do need to be online, but you can play it on your own, or you can play it in online matchmaking, or you can play it with a group of friends. Definitely recommend checking it out. This has been Chrono Joe. Peace out.
That was a rough one, no joke. What?
I'll bet those washouts regret the day they left Shoreline. Thanks for making me look good.
Nadine, your intel was priceless. Eddie Raja, thank